In the previous video, we talked about how external factors impact a firm's performance. In this video, we'll move one step closer to the firm itself and discuss how industry structure impacts that firm's performance. If I were to ask you what is the most important predictor of a company's performance, you might be surprised to learn it's nothing the company itself does, but in fact, it's the overall industry. This is a quick and dirty chart that kind of supports that fact. It shows the return on equity for a number of different industries. Essentially, if a few years ago you had invested in technology broadly, it doesn't really matter if you'd picked the right company, you probably still would have done better than if you'd invested in a number of banks or basic materials companies. So why is industry so important, and what impacts the profitability of an industry? Well, if you remember one tool from this class, it's probably going to be Michael Porter's 5 Forces. There's a separate video, an interview with Michael Porter himself, describing the tool and how it's applied. Instead, I'm going to focus on highlighting a couple of the nuances and criticisms of Porter's 5 Forces. So in a nutshell, Porter's theory is that managers tend to think about existing competitors but neglect to consider the role of other key actors, namely suppliers, customers, possible new entrants, and substitute products. His theory has become wildly popular, but there isn't a lot of empirical research to back it up. There's also been some new variants on Michael Porter's 5 Forces. Some add a 6th force of complementors. We will talk about the role of complementors in this class, but not right now. Here's an example, I'm sorry if this is a bit blurry, actually taken from a Data Monitor report, and Data Monitor is a service that provides industry overviews for paying customers. At least according to Data Monitor, the oil and gas industry displays a high degree of rivalry, which would be expected given that there are just a few large companies that dominate the industry, and a relatively modest threat of new entrants, which once again is to be expected given the high cost and barriers to entry. I will ask you to apply the 5 Forces model in this class, and at first glance it looks deceptively simple, but I've found that students encounter the same stumbling blocks over and over again. And the biggest one is that they don't define the industry carefully. So Porter defines an industry as a group of companies offering products or services that are close substitutes for each other. That is, products or services that satisfy the same basic customers' needs. So he defines it primarily based on customers' needs, but he also specifies that the scope of products or services offered helps define industries as well as geographic scope. So even if companies offer two very similar sets of products or services, if they don't serve the same geographic market, for example, Thai restaurants in Fairbanks don't serve the same market as Thai restaurants in Seattle, then they are not in the same industry. Also, watch out for lumping many different parts of the same value chain into one industry. For example, think about the automotive sector. The companies that make components like brakes are in a different industry than the folks who actually assemble the vehicles and put their brand name on it. And that's probably a different industry than, say, the Jiffy Lubes and folks that do after-purchase servicing for a vehicle. Second, I want to remind you to focus on structural characteristics of a market. Think about the barriers to entry, the number of competitors. Is this an oligopoly? Is this perfectly competitive? And how price sensitive are customers? What's the elasticity of demand like? You've been given readings that have empowered you with all these different vocabulary terms, so please apply these concepts and try to use them. Don't simply observe an industry and say that the competition or the threat of existing rivalry is very high without having some quantitative or qualitative observations framed in these terms to support your assertion.